And now we're bringing on Aryeh Lightstone, a former senior advisor to the U.S. ambassador to Israel, for a preview of what might become of Gaza after the war. Aryeh, thank you for your time this morning. If Israel does succeed in its goal of eradicating Hamas, what entity would govern Gaza?
Well, I think it depends on who steps up to the plate and who is governing the United States of America at that point in time. Reflexively, Tony Blinken has said, let's go back to a two-state solution, which ultimately means that he wants Ramallah by Abbas to go ahead and to govern both the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, as well as Gaza. That's a failed idea. It's been a failed idea for 30 years, and all it does is doom the region to repeat itself. What Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke about yesterday was not just demilitarizing Gaza, but de-radicalizing Gaza. And if you can remove the radical elements from Gaza, which granted, I think is harder than demilitarizing Gaza, then you have an opportunity to build what people used to call Singapore of the Middle East, but I'd like to re-describe it as Dubai of the Middle East, because there is a model to actually make this work here.
So can you lay out some of the possibilities of who could govern, whether that's Fatah, whether that's a PA?
Yeah, none of them can govern. None of them have demonstrated their ability or willingness, frankly, to govern. I think you need a new entity, and I think you need new leadership to show up. The world has invested billions of dollars into this region. Show me where there's a leader under 45 who is willing to say that they wish to live side by side with Israel. Until that person shows up, I don't believe that Israel has anybody to hand the keys to. There's going to be a process. It's going to be a long process, but it should be a productive process to make sure that Israel does not need to repeat what's been going on since 2005.
Aryeh, what do Gazans want? I mean, considering that there is a survey that shows a few years back that about half of them support Hamas leadership, but we have seen clearly that that has not led to a good outcome.
Well, I think you've got two different questions. You have the outcome, which says that I live only to destroy Israel, of which there is a population base in Gaza that truly believes that. They are incompatible with being neighbors. It will not exist. It cannot exist. And those people need to be demonstrated very clearly that that reality will never happen. Now, the rest of Gazans, and I hope that that is the majority of Gazans, want somebody to deliver for them. It's very clear that Hamas has not delivered for them. It's equally clear that the PA and Fatah have not delivered for them in the West Bank either. I think they're looking around the region and says, who can deliver? The model needs to be based upon what's worked in the UAE, what's worked in Bahrain, what is working in Saudi. I'm not advocating rule from those countries, but I am advocating copying and pasting what has worked in those countries to be able to go and work in Gaza. That's the only model for success. Short of that, Israel will have to maintain full military and unfortunately civilian control until it can be replaced with something that is both moderate and successful.
And on that note, do you expect the United Nations forces to control Gaza border in the meantime?
No, the United Nations is bad at that. I don't believe Israel is going to go ahead and hand the keys over. When Israel handed the keys over to the United Nations for the north in Lebanon, Hezbollah has gone from a couple thousand rockets to over 150,000 rockets. The UN has decided both they don't have the will and or the interest to act.
Does Israel have a plan to help them relocate back to where they were and then also help the area rebuild? And if so, what would that look like?
They absolutely do. The question is whether the world will join them in reality or whether the world will be focused on fantasy. If the fantasy is that Fatah or the PA will come in and rule just like they have in the West Bank, then we're going to wind up with the same, quote, cycle of violence, which what cycle of violence ultimately means is that people are raised in order to kill Jews. They kill Jews and the Jews strike back. That doesn't work anymore. There are models in the Middle East of successful countries. We need to copy and paste from the successful countries and not go ahead and try to replace the not successful countries. I'll give you just a good example. The PA still has a rule on its books, a law on its books, which incentivizes terrorists to kill people. That is a law based upon the Palestinian Authority, which are considered the peaceful partners in this region. There needs to be, starting from scratch, what are the basics that are required in order to be a partner? And Israel will be there and patient in order to develop both the leadership, but also the mechanisms for these laws to come into place.
So, Aryeh, you talk about successful Arab societies here. Why is Hamas now a terrorist organization governing Gaza? Why has that area become a breeding ground for terrorists, whereas other Arab nations are peaceful and they recognize Israel?
Yeah, well, one of the problems is us, meaning the Western world, donating to the UNRWA which there's two different concepts that happens. Number one is assuming that everybody in Gaza is still a refugee, which is ridiculous. Gaza has been under control of Hamas or the Palestinians since 2005. You are not a refugee any longer at that point in time, but they're still funded in these refugee schools, which teach the fact that they are there only temporarily in order to ultimately go back and to reconquer Jerusalem. The October 7th was called the Al-Quds flood. What does Al-Quds flood mean? It means that we are going to flood Israel until we can conquer and re-liberate Jerusalem. Until the international world decides, like President Trump did, that Jerusalem is Israel's, it will always be the capital of Israel's, and that Israel is looking to make peace, but it needs a partner on the other end, then there is no partner there. So in order to develop that, terrorism needs to be eradicated, but what Prime Minister Netanyahu said, it needs to be de-radicalized. If we're looking at our cities and we're looking at our college campuses, we can take a lesson from the Prime Minister. We need to de-radicalize those as well. You cannot chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That is an inherently genocidal chant. If you look at the countries that are successful in the region, they do not allow incitement during Friday prayer. They do not allow incitement in their school education. Incitement is the very basic that's first eliminated from the educational policy, and then you have room to be able to grow and to be free. Until that comes up as an accepted neighbor in the region, there will just be this never-ending cycle of hatred. Hatred will lead to violence, and violence will ultimately lead to war.
Well, thank you for this valuable insight on this. R.E.A. Lightstone, a former senior advisor to the U.S. Ambassador to Israel.
Thank you.